Hey everybody, welcome back to Mac and Mike. We're Zooming today. You can't see I am Mike. That is Mac, but you can't see him yet until he starts speaking.
Uh,
So
I'm
everybody,
here, I'm speaking.
yes, everybody knows Mac, and we didn't really have anything designed. We were going to kind of do a behind the scenes where we talk about what we're going to talk about. And of course, Mac looks funny staring at his computer trying to figure things out.
I had a weird message pop up on my computer that said Zoom wasn't working, so I had to look at it, and it appears that it's working to me.
Yeah. So what's going on in your mind this week that we should talk about?
Well, I'm kind of proud of the whole government shutdown being over, Mike. Um, I'm not sure what progress we made, if any, for the what was it, a 40 or 50-day shutdown of the government. As far as I'm able to discern, I'm able to understand, the Democrats were kind of not willing to take the clean continuing resolution, the clean CR, and instead wanted to add a lot of extra spending that was previously eliminated with what did President Trump call it? The one big beautiful bill.
Yep.
We eliminated a lot of spending, especially spending as it related to healthcare subsidies that went to various states that specifically and uniquely and individually helped pay for illegal immigrants' health care. The Republicans were unwilling to do that. And after the shutdown of whatever number of days it was, I think they passed a continuing resolution without any of that pork money, right?
Yeah, that's what I understand, but we could go through this all again, I guess, in January because it only takes us through till then. I, I posted an article about this that before 1980, we didn't have this kind of problem. There was a ruling by a DOJ official that said they had to shut certain government agencies down when they couldn't pass a budget during the Jimmy Carter administration. So now we have this big problem. And somebody last night, I think on Gutfeld, said, why don't we just go back and reinterpret the law the way it used to be interpreted? We wouldn't have this problem.
Right.
But
You
now
know
it's
what?
seen as political
I'm
leverage.
glad they continued to pay the military. I'm glad they continued to pay some of the critical services, that they kept operating despite the fact there was no continuing resolution. But here's a question for you, Mike. Why did we keep doing these continuing resolutions? Why don't we do a new budget?
Well, because we can't agree. And
But isn't that the primary purpose for which the House of Representatives exists?
yeah, but the holdups in the Senate most of the time, not always, but they need a 60 vote threshold. They don't want to use the nuclear option because then it could be used for everything else in the future. But the big fear is that the Democrats are going to do that next time anyway. So nobody wants to be the first one to pull the nuclear trigger. Um, and somebody else suggested we should go back to the old standard, which took two-thirds of the Senate. So you'd have to have, I guess, close to 70 uh, votes or 67, something of that nature. I guess to be more bipartisan was the reason. And I'm not sure that we have that kind of bipartisan existing anymore. And my comment to my friends was the only thing the shutdown proved to us, Mac, is we need less government, not more.
Well, you're probably right with that, Mike. And I saw your article on Vets for Trump, and I enjoyed that your opinion on that. But I guess what I'm saying is a representative republic with two houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, our founding documents, the Constitution is very, very clear. All spending must begin with the House of Representatives, with a bill in the House of Representatives. And they do that specifically because there are more members of the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives is closer to the voter, that is, from number of people that each representative in their district that they represent. So the thought being that representatives only a 2-year term, and if the voters don't like what the House of Representatives is spending money on, they can vote the bums out. But we have what for the last 20 years, Mike? We've not had a new budget. It's been a long ass time. All we've done is continue resolutions which continue spending at a previously established level, with some minor modifications. And my point is that our priorities of this nation certainly have changed in the past even 10 years, right? I mean, we have different levels of threats, different types of threats. Um, the world is a changing place. Many of the countries that once were staunch allies of the United States of America are no longer the countries that they used to be. They are influenced more heavily by the population of immigrants that have come into their country. And so I'm not sure how closely aligned we remain with many of those World War II allies who typically are the beneficiary of our largesse in the ways of, funding and, foreign aid and all those kinds of things. Shouldn't we at least look at that and decide if those funding levels are the correct level? Shouldn't we look at that and decide whether or not we need to, because we haven't in the past, direct more funding to homeless veterans as an example? Shouldn't we direct more funding towards the homeless of all sorts who are there mostly because of some sort of mental health issues? There are different priorities, I think, today, Mike, than there were 10, 15, 20 years ago. And our national government's budget needs to address that. Even the immigration issue, I think we need more money for immigration and the solutions for not only illegal immigration, but solutions for legal immigration. How we let people in and why we let them in and who we let in and all those kinds of things. So I think we really do need to get away from continuing resolutions, and we really do need to have the debate about what this country needs and what it doesn't need. Because I'll ask you this question, Mike. Maybe it's unfair. You're not necessarily a Democratic strategist or a Democratic voter, but what does the Democratic Party stand for today?
Well, they're in big flux. They've got that big split between the far left, the socialists and the, half commies, and then the regular Democrats. Like the only one that we can think of right now, there may be more in the House, but the one that's vocal in the Senate is our Senator John Fetterman, Democrat. And, that's just an interesting side note that all the people wishing him well are now Republicans and conservatives. All the people wishing he die are Democrats. That's a
interesting.
shame.
He fell and hurt himself.
Yeah.
And there are Democrats who are cheering on the fact that he got injured and hoping that he would die. Isn't that a vulgar aspect of politics USA today?
Yeah. I mean, my God. Like I said, I don't have to agree with somebody to sit down and have a conversation with them and treat them like a decent human being. As long as they're not rabid. I don't like radical right people. I don't like radical left. I'm not exactly a centrist. I'm definitely somebody that is way more conservative than centrist. But at the same time, I understand I didn't walk a mile in that other person's shoes. I didn't have their upbringing. I don't know how their mind works. So, I can sit and ask. I have a lot of Democrat fans. People sort of joke about that. It's like, I got black friends, right? Well, name one. Well, you met my Democrat friends down in the Outer Banks, and I have one here. Yeah, but even my friend here said he'd vote for me for president because I listen, and I'll talk to you, and I'll try and reason things out. So I don't know what the answers are, Mac. I was looking up. I didn't know. Did you mean the last time we had a not just a budget, but a what do they call it? Balanced budget. When was the last time we had that?
Well, see, we don't have balanced budgets because we have the Fed and we're able to print more money than we have. and that's why we're $38 trillion in debt as a nation. No, I'm talking about once upon a time in the United States of America on an annual basis, Congress got together and they created a budget. That was, they debated in the various committees about what they were going to fund and what they weren't going to fund, and they put together, they cobbled together a budget with compromises from both the Democrats and the Republicans. They put forth that budget, the budget was approved, and then it was ratified or also co-voted on by the Senate, and we then had a bill that was ready to present to the president for signature. We haven't had an organically created budget, Mike, for a great number of years. We've been funding our budget with continuing resolutions, which says we're taking this budget that was created 10 or 15 years ago, and with some minor tweaks for cost of living and that kind of stuff, we're just going to do it again. Well, that's stupid in my estimation, and it's not anywhere close to doing the job for which the members of the House of Representatives were elected to do. You know, most states, Mike, have a mandated, constitutionally required balanced budget requirement. The federal government does not. So, yes, there should be a requirement for a balanced budget. That goes without saying. But I just want them to have the debate about what we're going to fund and what we're not going to fund, and have that debate now in the House of Representatives with real people making real arguments, debates for what we should be paying for and what we shouldn't. You know, one of the primary purposes of the government of the United States, that is the federal government, the central government, it's to protect and defend the citizens and the nation. That's what it's there for. So the military, one could even argue like organizations like the CIA are part of that defense. But, you know, when we decide how much money we're going to give to foreign governments, how much tax dollars from the American public we're going to give to foreign governments, shouldn't that be debated at least once a year? Shouldn't that be validated why we're giving those countries money? You know, and the pet projects that we're continuing to, you know, the mating habits of the tsetse fly. Do you really believe we need to do that anymore? I'm sorry, Mike. We need to have a debate about what this nation is spending money on, and the House of Representatives is falling down on their singular most important job. Every time we approve a continuing resolution, that's a failure of the House of Representatives.
Yeah, I just looked it up, by the way. The last balanced budget was 2001, and it resulted in the next year having a small surplus. So that was good. And the last regular budget that you're talking about was in the late 90s. Both these things occurred under President Clinton when they had, I guess, Newt Gingrich was the Republican in charge of the House, and they had that deal with America or whatever he called it.
Contract with America.
Contract with America.
If you remember, the House of Representatives refused to do anything. President Clinton signed that bill in protest.
Yeah.
He gets credit for having a balanced budget, but he only signed it in protest. Right. He did not want to sign it.
Well, they could have probably crushed him with a 2/3 majority in that case, because I think it came up that high.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right. I mean, if I said that I don't think politicians should be allowed to run unless they have like a 750 credit score or higher. And
that's interesting.
You know, well, you were a real estate guy, and for a short period of time, I owned a mortgage company, and you know, my credit score is higher than that. But you know, if you can't handle your own money, how are you going to handle the people's money? And number two, I made the other statement, which I got a lot of blowback from. I said, maybe you shouldn't be allowed to vote unless you have a 700 credit score, or at least 680. Set some kind of standard. And then I had somebody say, well, I had a hard time in life, blah, blah, blah. This was a conservative Republican. And he said, you know, I wouldn't have been allowed to vote. Well, I didn't want to get into an argument at the time. But what I would have said, if I didn't want to hurt somebody's feelings or take the time to argue, is, okay, that may be true on one-off situations. You're always going to find that type of thing. But my point was, having the history of understanding the mortgage collapse that happened right after I opened my mortgage company, and I started studying about how we were loaning money to all these people that could not afford to pay it back Then we were creating derivatives and chopping the good credit score people in with the low and mixing the mortgages. That's what caused the confusion. They couldn't unwind it.
Yep.
And it's always that case. It's sort of like the paying for college thing. We come up with this whole, oh, let's pay off the college debt for these poor people. No, if you anytime you incentivize bad behavior, it continues and gets worse. So by paying for people's college, by continuing to buy things that we can't possibly afford and passing it down to our children, the other thing they came out with is a 50-year mortgage. And I thought of you right away, me as a broker, you as a real estate agent. Um, okay, I understand that you're, excuse my French, pissing away all this money in rent. And that's the idea. So even though the interest rates are going to suck up a majority of the money you're paying, you are making a little bit of progress. I can get that. And nobody stays in their house that long. So
Yep.
you wouldn't be in this 50-year mortgage thing. It's almost like a starter plan. I'm not sure that it's ever going to gain traction. The other idea is portability of mortgages. That'll work for people that got really low interest rates. And I said, well, rather than being able to get more money on your next house at the same interest rate, no bank's going to do that. But maybe at least what you could do is port the amount of money that you still had owed on the previous house to the new house at that particular interest rate, and then split the interest rate to bring the high interest rate down to match somewhere between the low and the high.
Or treat it as a second mortgage at the higher
Well, you
rate.
could do that, yeah, like home equity line of credit or something of that nature.
That's a great idea, Mike. I don't think it's ever going to fly because what's going on now is that corporations are buying up all the real estate and they're trying to incent people to rent, not to buy. The American dream used to be, a house, a white picket fence, a dog, and two kids, right?
Yeah.
Well, now European descendants in America are having 1.3 or 1.5 children, something like that. And so we're not having replacement value of the population. But in addition to that, houses are out of the realm of possibility for many Americans based on the cost of the house, the cost itself of the real estate, plus the excuse me, the interest rates being so high, making the payment so high, and you compare that to the wages. Mike, when you and I entered the workforce, it was a whole lot less expensive, both in real dollars and in percent of your income, to buy a home. I remember I was in the Army as a PFC in 1973, and in those days you reported for pay. You walked up to the pay officer, you saluted, and you gave your name, rank, and they would literally give you money in cash. And I made $377 a month. But that was enough money to buy a house, Mike. And now we have people that are making $120,000, $150,000 a year, and they can barely afford a mortgage payment.
Yeah, I mean, I of course, I'm 2 years younger than you, 2.5, and I guess you entered the military before me. I was 25 till I went active duty, so it was 1980, and we were getting paper checks, handed to us, and then they started the direct deposit thing. But yeah, I mean, I was working at United Parcel Service, making really good money in 1980. I was making like $11.72 an hour, which is stellar. That's like 45, $50 an hour today. And I took a 50% cut in pay to go active duty Air Force in 1983.
Yeah.
And it cost me a wife, it cost me a marriage, because that's a big chunk of change to lose. And she wanted exactly what you said: the white picket fence, the 2.5 kids and the dog, and the cat and the pool in the backyard. And of course, I could no longer provide that, so that really bothers a lot of women. But over time, I made the smartest decision. I retired at 44 years of age with a, full Air Force pension, and was able to start two different businesses over the last 23 years. And I've done okay. So these government shutdowns and stuff, they don't affect guys like me and you much.
Right.
As long as the and even if I lost my Social Security and my Air Force retirement, I'd be able to live 10 years, with no income. I'd be fine. But a lot of people can't say that. But it's because I have home equity. You
Yep.
know, I could probably live for 20 years. But yeah, it's difficult for the poor people and the people in the middle who are depending on these various plans like SNAP. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the week, and we can't believe the number of Americans on food stamps and the threshold that you reach. And I know people personally on food stamps, and I look at them and, the thing, you and I would never buy the crap they buy. This is the other thing. We talk about people that can work, that don't and get food stamps. Well, I'm going to tell you, people that get food stamps in general, they buy all kinds of. I can tell you, I can see people buying shrimp, filet mignon, all this kind of stuff on food stamps and junk food. Me, even though I've got the money to buy any damn thing I want, I'm still fairly frugal.
Yeah.
This is how we were raised back.
We
This
were
is
brought up that way. Yep.
we were brought up, yeah. So I think it's also a problem of lifestyle and expectations from the younger people. Maybe the wage gaps grow, maybe. Well, I'm sure it probably has. But we were always taught, you and I, to live beneath our means.
Yes.
Everybody today is living for the weekend. You and I live for retirement.
One of my favorite sayings, Mike, right? You remember, I'm sure, the richest man in the world is not he who has the most, but rather he who needs the least.
Yes, man.
And
Yes, sir.
when you have simple needs and you live frugally, to use your term, it makes everything work a little bit better. I'm amazed, if you remember when Mitt Romney ran for president, Mitt Romney said many things in his various debates and speeches, and he was criticized for so many of them. One of the things he said was that 47% of the people in America were net receivers or net takers from the government. That is, they received more from the government than they paid into the government in the various taxes. And he was ostracized and criticized and ridiculed for making such a statement, like being poor is a bad thing, and being poor is terrible and should be looked down upon. And that wasn't what he was trying to say. What he was trying to say is that, and I think it's borne out in some recent elections, if your life, as you mentioned, being able to buy that shrimp and filet mignon is based on your SNAP benefits. If you're living a lifestyle that is paid for by the government, and someone comes along who, even if they don't directly say it, is accused of being a person who is going to change those benefits and make those benefits less, people get very, very frightened. They get scared. How am I going to be able to live? How am I going to be able to pay? How am I going to be able to eat? How am I going to be able to pay my rent? And they vote not based on what's best for the country, but rather the frightened masses that are unwilling to believe that they can take care of themselves without those government benefits. And if you're convinced that you can't take care of yourself, that you need those government benefits to be able to survive, then you're going to vote for survival, not necessarily what's best for the United States of America. And I think that's true when you watch the election that Donnie was just elected, right?
Yep.
Why did, and there's so many different factors in the Mondami. They let illegals vote in those local elections. They don't let them vote for president, quote, supposedly, they don't let them vote for president, but they let them vote for the mayor's race, the local races in New York. So you've got population that has changed significantly, Mike, since you lived there, right? You lived there in the 60s in New York City. Well, the population of New York City today is ethnically and, demographically so very different than the New York City that you lived in, 80 years ago. and or 65 years ago, whatever it was. What I'm saying is that there are a number of people who cannot survive without that government handout, without that SNAP, without those benefits. And when they go and vote, it's not necessarily, you and I understand because we held up our, at one point in time in our life, we held up our hand and said, we swore an oath to protect and defend the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think when you take your citizenship test and you become a citizen, you have to bear a similar, you have to hold a similar oath that you're going to protect and defend the United States of America. Unfortunately, the reality of it is, Mike, with the disparity between, and I'm not talking about the rich and the poor because we're always going to have the rich and we're always going to have the poor. I'm talking about the disparity between the middle class and the upper middle class and the lower middle class. That's where I think the real problem lies. If you're in the lower middle class and you receive benefits from the government, whether that's Obamacare, healthcare service, or whether that is SNAP benefits, so you get food to eat. And it's even worse if you have children, right? It's one thing if you're taking care of yourself, because if you go hungry, you can deal with that, right? But if your kids go hungry, most people can't deal with that pain, not being able to take care of their children properly. So there's this great fear, and it's almost like you're being tethered to voting for, and I was about to say Democrats or Republicans. I won't say that. You're being tethered to voting for the people who promise you things for nothing, who promise you that extra something from the government that is going to make your life easier. And all that does, Mike, in my opinion, is, that forces up taxes on the the middle class, the upper middle class, and the wealthy to pay for the lower middle class and the poor. And at some point in time, as Margaret Thatcher once famously said, the problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money.
Yeah, I was watching Jimmy Carr today, and he made the joke: capitalism stinks. It's the worst possible economic system until you compare it to all others.
Yeah.
So that was kind of funny. But yeah, you went to New York, and my friend John Ventry, he pointed out he was running for governor in Pennsylvania. I want to call you and talk to you about that later. He asked for my help. But 90% of New York City's population in the 1960s was of European descent. Today, it's 31%. And I grokked that to make sure that statistic was true, and it's accurate. So, of course, the one problem we have is this unfettered immigration. And we used to assimilate people, and, new people coming in would learn to more or less, not completely, but more or less adopt American constitutional values and traditions. And even though they brought the foods from their nation and some of the positive things from their culture, that we all love, who doesn't love to visit Chinatown or Little Italy or something like that and, experience the culture. But, we were all Americans first, so that was a big problem. And, I don't know if we can just stop. We can't stop all immigration because we need some, but we really need to start. I mean, thank God Trump just stopped the illegal stuff, and everybody's screaming. Did you see that judge the other day ordered the release of 635 criminals or whatever picked up in Chicago?
Yes.
That's crazy, isn't it?
But see, Mike, we have, in our form of government, we have three co-equal branches of government. How can you have the court tell the executive branch what they must do? If the executive branch is, in fact, which is their responsibility, enforcing the law. The legislative branch makes the law. The executive branch enforces the law. The reason that the court system, judicial system exists is not to enforce the law. It's not their freaking job to enforce the law. Their job is to determine whether the law is constitutional or not. So that judge needs to be reprimanded for his interference with the executive branch enforcement of the law. And very honestly, Mike, I said this when we had the Supreme Court election in Pennsylvania 10 years ago. We had three justices who were elected to the Supreme Court who were absolutely violated the tenets of judicial code. And they ran for election based on things that they weren't supposed to even talk about, even consider. You're supposed to be completely unbiased when you get on the court and make decisions only based on the facts of the case.
Yeah.
What we have with this Supreme Court, we had people who were illegally held from being able to watch the opening of votes or the tallying of votes. We had the judicial system allow votes to be received 3 days after the deadline for votes. They eliminated the legal, lawful requirement to validate the signatures that were on the mail-in ballots. All of these things our court system did were illegal. Where do you go when the court makes decisions that are in and of themselves illegal? Now, I will tell you, the Constitution in Pennsylvania says that whatever the Supreme Court says the law is, the law is. So in Pennsylvania, because of the way our Constitution is set up, it doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says. They don't have to rely on what the legislative branch wanted when they passed the law. The Supreme Court is the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania because of our Pennsylvania Constitution. The law is whatever they say it is. And that's the problem. You cannot have one branch of government that is superior to the other. Co-equal has a meaning, a definition. You can look it up.
Yeah. No, that's greatly disappointing. And, you even go to the federal Supreme Court, and people were joking the other day. What was the saying? Greg Gutfeld said this: when you can't define what a woman is, you can't defend women.
Yes.
Define and defend. That was a pretty good statement. It sort of struck me. Yeah, that's true. Where do you go? The
Mike,
US.
I'll tell you, you mentioned the Supreme Court of the United States. What have the Democrats said publicly over and over again over the past year? If they get power again,
They're going to pack it.
They have the majority, they're going to change the makeup of the Supreme Court from 9 justices to 13 or 15 justices so that they can using the term pack the court, they can put liberal justices on the Supreme Court so that they too can rule by fiat, that is judicial decisions, and eliminate our very tenuous balance of 3 co-equal branches of government, because the Supreme Court will just legislate from the bench as they've done in the past.
How many years did the left control the Supreme Court?
Yep.
And now they're up in arms because the right has a little bit of an edge. But, the thing about Republican or conservative justices, I think they're less apt to make these crazy rulings. They're a little more fair-minded.
Yes.
Because sometimes you see all these complaints go up when a Trump-appointed or conservative-appointed judge rules with the liberals, because, sometimes it's a matter of law. My friend Joe, and others that I talk to, but I'm singling out Joe, who he often says things that are completely insane. He's not wrong in principle, but he doesn't understand that law isn't exactly what you think it is. Number one, at the Supreme Court level, it's nothing but an opinion. They call it rendered opinions. So, opinions, the old saying is like buttholes, everybody's got one. And, but Joe and others, this ought to be, and they ought to arrest people. But the one place that I do think there might be a legal case, I don't know. You'd have to talk to attorneys and get this before the Supreme Court. The states have their rights. We've talked about this a lot in the past. So when it comes to these liberal states having their rights, they do, but they can't supersede the federal law. And in my mind,
they can supersede the federal law in areas of the Constitution. The federal government has no stated enumerated powers.
Right.
But when the enumerated powers identify it to the federal government, then no, the state can't supersede it. And that's why immigration, the states can't supersede federal law because immigration is one of those things enumerated for the central government.
Right. And in that, these governors and mayors standing in the way of ICE, uh, they're just enforcing the law. I would say that's close to treason,
Yeah,
insurrection,
yeah,
somewhere
yeah,
in there. I mean, insurrection's armed. Treason is sort of to a foreign government, but it's denying where the federal law has jurisdiction. The state's not allowed to mess with that. They keep saying, "Well, we're not going to cooperate. We're not going to." But now they're standing in the way. It's like that's obstruction of justice, I believe.
yeah.
If I understand the law correctly, I'm not a legal scholar, but you listen to the arguments and you kind of think, yeah, that's obstruction of justice. Should they be arrested? Should they be fined?
Mike, we impeach judges when they do things that are inappropriate. And I would argue, as we've seen in the past, where members of the Supreme Court will say, if you look at the World Court, or if you look at the country of Australia, their law says this. Well, I'm sorry. The reason the Supreme Court exists is to do one simple thing. Whatever case is in front of them, whatever matter of law is being debated, their simple, unique, and only responsibility is to determine, does it pass muster as being constitutional or not? And that's the United States Constitution, not the Constitution of Ghana or any country in Africa or the World Court or anywhere else, not the UN. The Supreme Court is supposed to judge, is the matter constitutional according to the U.S. Constitution? And what we allow to happen, and what the media fails to identify and fail to say in their stories, is when they do something when they make a decision that is not in concert with the Constitution, there should be a hue and cry, and they should call out, they're making this decision based on something they've made up, because there's nothing in the Constitution that gives them the option to make this decision. And that's similar to the decision you're talking about with the court in Illinois. You have to let those prisoners go. I'm sorry. The federal government, the executive branch, their responsibility is to enforce the law. The law is created by the legislative branch, the Congress, the U.S. House of Representatives, and the Senate. Once they make the law, they can change the law. They can go back into session and change it into something different. But once the law is signed once they passed it, and the president signs it, and it's a legal law of the land in the United States, the court they can decide if it's constitutional or if it's not. And when it comes to illegal immigrants, it's a black and white decision. If these illegal immigrants are here, if they don't have the proper authority, if they've not followed our law to get in this country legally, then it is illegal, and the executive branch has the absolute right and the authority to do whatever they need to do to take those people and get them out of the country. The other thing, remember when they were sending the convicts back to their country of origin by plane, and some wacky judge somewhere said, "Turn that plane around." You know what the executive branch should have said to that judge? They should have said "FAFO." They freak around and find out. Those judges that do that, Mike, should be impeached immediately. There should be a process by where if a judge exceeds his authority and is potentially going to be impeached, they should be removed from the bench immediately and not let. You can pay them, but don't allow them to hear any more court cases until or unless they are reinstated or, in fact, they are impeached. This thing of judicial fiat usurping the authority of the other branches has to stop.
Yeah, I mean, this bar lawyers for less. So we only have a minute and 13 seconds left. I guess we got to kind of sum it up.
Well, I don't know. We talked about 3 or 4 topics, Mike. I'm glad that Donald Trump was able to get our government open again. And when I say Donald Trump, I mean the Republicans and the Democrats in the House and Senate coming to logical understanding and pass the CR. I'm glad that we have people in our federal government who have the guts to enforce the law. And regardless, and always remember, folks, three co-equal branches of government: legislative, judicial, and executive, and the purpose for which they exist. Other than that, I'm ready to say, Mac and Mike
Out.
out.